David Edward and Kevin Hall discuss Kevin's book, My Rosemount Memories.
Kevin, how are you?
Pretty good, David. How you doing?
I'm doing really good. Did I just ask you if it's okay if we recorded this?
Yes.
Yeah, and I've been jumping. You see, I hit record and I jump on you right away. And I've been doing this for like 50 interviews, and I didn't realize the first thing that Zoom was doing was like asking the person a question, which is why they always look so startled. I feel bad now. I noticed I didn't change. I still did it to you, but at least I'm aware of the pain that you're going through when it comes to starting one of these things.
It's kind of interesting that they have that up there, but I understand from a legal perspective, I guess.
Yeah, that's just the way it is. All right. So, Kevin, we're going to talk about your book called My Rosemount, Minnesota Memories. And it's your second book. But I think
Yes.
I think this is a very clever and interesting book because it's nonfiction, but it still tells the stories of you and your youth and just really the stories of the time, right? Of the place and of the time. So I think that's incredibly interesting. So that's my introduction to the book. Why don't you tell us what the book's about?
Well, let me start back just a little bit and why I got into writing in the first place. And my grandkids would always ask, "Hey, Grandpa, what was it like for you as a kid?" And so I would tell them stories. And then when my mom was still alive, we'd pay visits back to her with the grandkids. And they would say, "What was Grandpa like as a kid?" So Mom would start telling the stories. And I got to thinking, you know, they may remember some of this, but are they going to remember all of it? So I said, I've got a lot more stories. Let me start to put some of that down on paper. So I started to do that and a little bit more and a little bit more. And eventually, the outline was there and I'm writing and typing. And pretty soon I got 100 pages recorded. And I said, oh, geez, I got to turn this into a book. So the first one I wrote for the kids, I wrote as a Christmas gift to them. And I have a copy of that right here. It's actually my Christmas in Rosemount. And I was getting ready for bed one night and that title just popped in my head. I said, that's it. I got to write about that. So I put together that story for them. And it was a short story, about 60, 70 pages. I had it independently printed, as you can see inside, very large type.
Yeah.
I don't know how well you can see that, but because I knew my grandkids, which now range from 15 down to 4, and I got 6 of them, they needed a little bit bigger print to read. Well, I saw the look in their face when they got that book. It was just, that made the whole Christmas for me. And I'm one of these big softies. I love Christmas and the more gifts, the more food, the more people, the better it is. So I did that. And then I sat back and I said, I've got a lot more stories. And so I started with my first book and put down a lot of stories. And that was when I was from 6 years old up until 13. And at 13, my parents sat the family down and said, guess what? Dad's getting transferred with his job to Minnesota. So we're all moving to Minnesota. Here, I'm into 8th grade, getting ready to go into the big 9th grade.
Yeah.
And had my first really kind of official girlfriend and had a lot of friends. We played baseball, rode our bikes all over, the typical small town. Everybody watched out for everybody. And then to get picked up and moved to a whole new state and starting a whole new school. And so that's where this book takes off from. And so I would tell the kids the story of it. One of them I haven't quite told them, but it's in the book. My first week in this new school, and by the way, my graduating class had over 400 or around 400 kids in it.
Okay.
So I went from a small school, which maybe had 150 kids in the graduating class, to 400 kids in the graduating class. My first week in this new school, no friends. I'm in the back hallway, walking up the stairs to get to my next class. A lot of screaming and yelling going on. And I look up just in time to see one kid take his motorcycle helmet and whack the other kid over the head with it.
Jeez.
Well, he stumbles back, blood coming down from the top of his head. And I said, oh, my Lord, what am I in for at this place? It was shell shock. I didn't really say much the rest of the day. I went home. I didn't say much to my parents about it. It was, I didn't know how to react, but soon I kind of overcame that and started to make some friends, and really started to enjoy myself a lot more. And in fact, one of the people I talk about in this book quite a bit, he's a lifelong friend of mine, Brad Bixby. I refer to him as Bix. And we would go, he lived across the road from Crystal Lake, and we'd go fishing out there. He'd take his boat out and we'd go trolling in the lake. And then in the afternoon, come back. He loved to grill burgers, so we'd have burgers and that kind of stuff. So we started to really form a good friendship, and we're still best of friends to this day. And I really look back on that time now, and especially with social media, I've reconnected with so many of the kids from back then. In fact, just a simple little plug, one of my high school friends, Sue Otten, is now on the Appalachian Trail with her daughter, and they're hiking the full Appalachian Trail. They will end up in Georgia in December. And they're doing this for Parkinson's because they found out, unfortunately, her husband and her dad have Parkinson's.
Wow.
So they're doing that, and they've got a YouTube channel out there, Parkinson's for Michael J. Fox and that kind of thing. Sue, unfortunately, has taken 2 spills on the trail. One caused 9 stitches over her eye. The other, about 2 weeks ago, 10 staples in the head.
She's got to quit falling on her face.
Yeah.
You know?
So I told her, I said, Sue, you've got to get a bicycle helmet. And she has a bright orange bicycle helmet now that she's wearing. But I've got a lot of friends from that. And surprisingly, a lot of them have done extremely well from my grade. Paul Ingebrigtsen was the CEO of a worldwide company called Williams Sound.
Okay.
And Karen Kaul, Kaul, had done a lot. She's a very, very brilliant woman, done a lot in the medical field, and she's been in front of Congress to speak on a lot of things. She is a doctor, and she's done a lot with the testing of COVID and things like that. So very well renowned in her field. And these were kids that I hung around with. And I talk about some of them. Paul, in the book, he was a good friend. Another good friend, I reconnected with him actually in my last job that I had. I worked in the private sector for over 40 years. And so the last job was with the Xerox Corporation.
Yep.
And I was a project manager, and that was a field for me that, I loved it. I really excelled at.
You look like a Xerox project manager. You do. I swear to God. I swear to God, you do.
Well, I started out as a computer programmer with Eastman Kodak.
Oh, wow.
And then after about 18 years with them, the division I was in was sold off to another company. I was with them for 3 months and said, not for me, and went over to Xerox. And I really excelled over there. They really supported me, and nothing but good to say about the company. I may not like some of what upper management did with the managing of it, but we've all been there with that kind of thing.
Xerox went through some rough times, right? I mean,
Yes,
did they actually go bankrupt? I know they were I know like all fell apart, and they've kind of built it back some.
Yes, they did. And they embraced the digital workplace, but they might have done it a little slower than they had wanted. But once it caught on, and you could see the writing on the wall, when you have 7 to 10 standalone copiers and you replace it with one digital copier that's online, there goes a lot of your ongoing revenue.
Yeah.
So you had to make that up. And I was in the division that we went out and we did a lot of outsourcing work. So my specialty was in hospitals, helping them get out of paper forms, and get into electronic forms. Well, the first thing they had to do was manage all those forms. And we had electronic solutions for managing of that. And I became known throughout the company for a lot of my healthcare expertise. And anytime forms management, call Kevin. Forms management, call Kevin. And I was handling 12, 14 projects at a time, and I just loved it. I loved it.
Nice. All right.
So this is kind of my second act, if you will, of I'm retired and enjoying writing and spending time with the grandkids and just having a ball.
Well, let's dig into the writing of the book a little bit, and
Sure.
let's use your project management slant. So, how did you organize yourself to get the book done? You know, I mean, right? Because that's what project managers do, is they organize people. Usually, other people. My always joke was, you know, they usually spend a lot of time and not do anything, but being a project manager. Not that I have anything wrong with project managers, but yeah.
So the biggest thing in project manager, that when I was coaching people and interviewing some for project management roles, is communications.
Yeah.
The number one thing, if you do nothing else, at least communicate to people, communicate to your sponsors, communicate to the folks who are actually doing the work, make sure everybody knows what's happening. Well, I didn't take my own advice, and I didn't do that. I don't know if it was purposely or not, but when I was writing this,
Yeah.
I had my PC at the dinner table, and it's just my wife and I in the house. And so she would be doing stuff, and I'd be keying away a little more, keying away a little more. And finally, one day, I said, "You probably wondered what I've been doing." And I turned the PC around to her, and I said, "I want you to take a read." So she took a read on that. I'm not kidding you, David. Tears. She
Yeah.
had tears from her eyes from it, because she remembers a lot of this. We met in high school,
Okay.
and we've been married coming up. Well, April will be 47 years.
Wow.
So, and she was even telling me, she says, "I didn't know some of this." So,
That's awesome.
but since then, to write my next books, I had to get more organized. And as I've worked with some other folks, that, "Oh, I've always wanted to write a book, but I don't know how to get started." So I said, well, don't think about it as the big elephant. Start to look at it as little pieces and put those pieces down. And I'm a big proponent of the outline. Just start to put it into, I don't care what order it is, just write it down. Even if you want to do a bulleted list, that's fine. Just write it down. Then start to, as a mentor and boss of mine would say, flesh it out some. Start to put a little bit of detail around it. And pretty soon you'll start to see the chapter formulate. And once you do that, sit down and start to put some words around it. And I know from listening to your podcast, you ask a lot of the questions around, are you a word count person?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm not a word count person, but I am a page count person.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I look at the pages and I kind of equate in my head, well, there's roughly 300, 350 words, kind of
Yeah.
like that on a page. So, you know, if I write 7 to 10 pages, I know I'm doing okay. And like on my third book that I'm writing, I've got almost 2 full chapters done now. That book, I'll tell you, I've got the outline and I've got a lot of the stories, but I am having some motivational issues on that one.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you're
it's
still
going
pretty.
to take
you-
longer.
You're still pretty close. I mean, this book just came out in July, right?
Yes.
So July, August, September, and then we're just the beginning of October. So it's just been out 3 months.
Correct.
Yeah. So yeah, you maybe.
And my first book came out in April.
Oh, is that right? Okay. All right. Okay. Well, that's good. You know, it's interesting you mentioned the page count. One of the reasons why I started this podcast, I tell people, is, you know, when I decided I wanted to write, I like anyone else, I didn't, I figured I'd go find out how do you do it. There'd be a place you go read, and here's how you write a book. And it's there to a point. But the advice, was terrible for me, for my style, because there's so many different styles. Although the thing that has always stuck with me is I watched a video of Stephen King, and he was on with George R.R. Romero, whatever the guy, the dragon guy. I have not read any of that guy's stuff. But they were talking about getting work done. And the conversation came around, how much do you write? And when it came to Stephen King, he's like, I write 6 pages a day. And I thought, That's interesting. What's a page? to your point,
Yes.
right? How many?
Yep.
Because how many is that? And it's somewhere between 250 and 400 words. There's so
Yep.
many variables in it. So I decided the page was 250 words because I'm a
Okay.
cheater. So I write 1,500 words a day, 6 pages. But really, I secretly know it's really probably about 4 pages. Um,
Yep.
but 4 pages. I mean, if a book is 300 pages, then 4 pages, you're talking 2 months, 2.5 months, you've written a book.
Yeah,
You know what I
exactly.
mean? Yeah. So
Exactly. And that's how I tell people, just start.
yeah.
Sit down. And I remember another one of the folks who've been on your podcast, Stacy Demolsky,
Mhm.
and the memoir midwife. Boy, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah.
And I've taken a couple of Stacy's courses since then. In fact, Stacy was the one when I saw her podcast. That was the first one I saw with you and her, and that's what got me to start to
Oh, good.
contact you and say,
Good.
"Hey, this would be fun."
Okay.
And she always says, at the end, sit your butt down in the chair.
Yeah,
There's something to be said for that.
there is. Yeah.
And I sit down. I usually do my work in the evening. That seems to be best for me. And I'll grab a cup of tea. I'm a coffee guy in the morning and tea guy in the evening. And I'll sit there and I'll just click clack away. And next thing you know, if there's been a few mornings, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Oh, I think it's time to go to bed. So,
Isn't it amazing though? I mean, we both share the white beard, the white hat. I mean, there's a lot. From our conversation, I might be following you a little bit on the trail of life. I can't quite tell, but I think you're a little older than me. Is what I'm kind of saying. But isn't it amazing how writing? Because I feel like an old guy sometimes, and I don't care about a lot of stuff I used to care about. But when I write, it's a weird endorphin high. And
yes,
I
yes.
and I can't explain it to anyone, and it's weird because I'll come over here and I'll write. My books I call them pulp. So I got people running around with guns shooting each other and that kind of stuff. But so I'll write like a big action scene, and I'm like jazz. But then I come out of the office, nothing's happened. I've
Yeah,
just sat in a
yeah,
chair
yeah.
for 2 hours. But it's interesting the process of writing the book yourself versus reading a book someone else wrote. It's just interesting.
It is, and I think the word is cathartic, in a sense that I'll tell you when I'm done and I wrote something, I said, oh, I really like how that came out, and I just kind of go, ah. And it's just like all this is released,
Yeah.
and I mean, you just feel, and I understand when people say you feel light in your feet afterwards, because sometimes you do. You just feel good. And I got to thinking a little bit more about, legacy, and we're in
Yeah.
such a throwaway society. And I had, in a 3-year period of time, my father-in-law, mother-in-law, and my mom all passed away. Now, my dad passed away when my wife and I were on our honeymoon, and it was totally unexpected.
Yeah. Wow.
But come to find out, it's from a heart condition none of us knew about. It's a valve issue, and I too have that same thing. It's hereditary. But the thing is, now that I know, I'm under cardiologist care, and so we take care of it, and eventually we'll have to have it replaced. So, but it got
Oh,
me thinking.
so that's in front of you? Just
Yes, I know
yeah.
that's in front of me. Every day I wake up and know that's in front of me.
Yeah, that's awful.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just one of these things. You got to do what you got to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we're in such a throwaway society. I got to thinking when my dad passed away, and my in-laws and my mom, what did they leave other than stories that I know?
Yeah.
And so with when I go, what am I leaving behind? Well, maybe the kids might remember the stories. Grandkids might remember fewer, but the great grandkids and aunt, they're not going to remember much. And I do have a great great grandfather that had written a post Civil War book. And he dedicated the monument, the 97th Regiment New York Volunteers, at Gettysburg. And had he not written that book, that probably would have not been known. And it led me to look into the family tree a little bit. And I got in contact with some people and did some reading, and come to find out Winston Churchill's a relative.
Oh, wow.
His grandmother was Clarissa Hall. Now, it's not in my direct line, but we all come from John Hall, who came over to the U.S. in the 1630s. And then another member of the chain there is Lyman Hall, signer of the Declaration of Independence. Things that, we should embrace. And I want my family to embrace that. And I don't know, you mentioned the white hat, but I don't know if you see.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And, if I haven't mentioned already, thank you for your service. I mean, I am in awe at people who do that. I never was in the service, but my dad was in World War II, my grandpa, World War I, my great-great-grandfather, Civil War, and many, many wars. One of our relatives was a doctor during the American Revolution War.
Wow.
He was captured and brought to the ships out in the harbor where they kept a lot of the prisoners, and he became the doctor to the folks on the ship. And I would love to find out more information about all of that. And if we took some time to just write some of this stuff down, just think of the family history. And that gets me jazzed.
And I think, and that's right. I limit this all the time. My wife and I, we just started watching Stranger Things season 4. And it takes place in the year I graduated high school, 1986. And I was telling her, I said, looking at the costumes and, the sets and everything, I said, it's 100% accurate, but it's not what it looked like. Because people trying to look back 20, 30 years or more, however long, when they try and recreate it, they do it with today's lens. And,
yes.
So like in the 80s, what was big? Well, the feathered hair and the collars and the colors, and they capture that, but it's like not every single person, it's like too much, it's overload and stuff. So it's just, I think books like your book are really important because it's what we would call, it's a primary source. It's a firsthand account. It's not a secondhand account, and not everyone, nowhere close to everyone, has the time or the skill to write that down. So we lose the firsthand accounts, and then we wind up with these summary amalgamations, and everything becomes kind of a cliche, right? Which is enough things to 25 questions on some college freshman's test for the 80s, and that becomes the 80s or 60s or whatever. So I think books like this are important. So I would say keep doing it. keep going.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've done, and I'll just grab a copy of the book here, David, is I kind of split the book up. 75% are my stories, but I always include in the back of the book, and I'm just turning to that, there's all kinds of information in the back, all kinds of pictures
that's awesome.
that are highlighting the history of that era. And I got to show you one picture. I don't know if you can zoom in there. You see that airplane on the hotel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. That was called the Airliner Motel, Highway 55 in Eagan, Minnesota. And it was one of those landmark kind of places. And it was where my parents and us stayed when we first moved to Minnesota until we found more of a permanent residence. Well, I went looking around and around and around for that picture, and I knew we had one, but both my wife and I are fumbling through. We couldn't find it. So I went online and I got in touch with a lot of the historical societies in Minnesota. They didn't have one. They had one of the hotel being demolished. It was a controlled burn by the Eagan Fire Department, but they didn't have this one. And they said, we're dying to get one of those because that was there for years and years and years. So I eventually, as you can tell, did find it, and I shared it with them, and now it's all over the historical societies out there. But I go out to various different websites. There's one called the Twin Cities Reminiscing. And so I'm on that one, and I post a lot of these pictures. And that particular one garnered over 500 likes and over 100 comments back just in the first 2 weeks. Wow. So, I mean, people love that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, this is history that we need to really preserve and keep out there. So I put that into my books. This next book that I'm writing won't do that just due to the subject matter of the book, but the first 2 books I wrote all have a lot of history. And the first book I wrote, it's interesting, as I mentioned earlier about Ilion, New York, that's my hometown. There hadn't been a book written about Ilion since the 1970s. And here it's a town with a ton of history, just a ton of history. The first that came out of there. We also had John F. Kennedy come down and do his lobbying in town. People left school, were told, leave, go downtown and see him. And this is a town of 10,000 people.
Yeah,
I mean,
wow.
we're not a huge town. Anyways, I went looking when I was first writing the book. I want to see what else is out there. So I ran across a author by the name of Joseph Kalia. And Joe, I said, wait a minute, that name is familiar. I had a high school social studies teacher, Joseph Kalia, when I lived in Ilion. Come to find out, we got in touch with each other. It's the same guy.
Wow.
He was writing a book about Ilion. And that one is right here, Our Town, New York, Ilion, New York,
Okay,
selective 300 years. But here, nobody had written any books on Ilion. And here Joe and I are writing at the same time. Come to find out, there is another guy, Dr. Dave Marley, who also lived in Ilion, just recently put a book out, only his is on the addiction. He is a doctor of pharmacy and a very interesting guy, and his battling on addiction. And he started at a young age with alcohol and how he battled back from that. And he became very well known and put together a major pharmacy. And he's retired now. He's done very well for himself, but he fights, and he'll tell you, he fights the demons every day.
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah.
It's just an ongoing thing. But now, what happened? 3 authors out of Ilion. And, it's a small town here. But Joe and I did a book signing down at the Ilion Library. Extremely well received. And I mean, the people down there, they just loved it. They couldn't get enough of it. And we're running over on time. And the library folks are saying, "No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." And because we just had people coming in, and, I talked to Joe beforehand, and I said, "Should we bring some books down? Do we sell them there?" He says, "Oh, I've been to a few of these. You'll only sell a couple books. Bring a couple." I brought my box. He brought his. We sold out, and
Wow.
they still wanted more.
Wow.
So that was just a fabulous time. And now Joe's actually writing a sequel to this book, and he's got other books out there on the Civil War, and he's got one on Abe Lincoln out there. But he's another great author you might want to get in contact with.
Sure,
Just an overall good guy. But anyways, he had written so much. This is like 400 pages here, and he had written so much for it that he said, "Well, geez, I got to make a second volume out of this."
Almost as many pages as there are people.
Yes, and he's down in Florida. I know you live in Florida.
Yeah.
He's over towards the Fort Myers side, and I've got a lot of friends. In fact, back to my book, my good buddy Bix lives in Naples.
Okay.
And so we've been down there and visited him, and we thought about moving down there. But I'm not a huge outdoor person when it gets hot.
Yeah.
I'm more the inside, and we've got relatives over in Vero Beach, so in Lakeland, other relatives there. So
yeah. All my haunts. I know all those words. All right, Kevin. Well, look, I could talk to you forever. We've gone way
this is great,
over.
David.
Yeah,
this is
fun.
Great.
But we do have to wrap it up. So tell you what, when you get your next book out, let's do it again.
I would love to do that, David, and I really appreciate the time today. This has been a lot of fun.
So it has been fun. All right, Kevin. Thank you. I'll talk to you. Bye.
Okay, take care, David. Bye-bye now.
Thank you for watching. Please consider hitting the subscribe button.